afternoon, Alison.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you.
Jolly good. So we're going to talk a little bit about levy transfer today within Norfolk and Suffolk. Is it Norfolk and Suffolk?
Yeah, Norfolk and Suffolk, yeah, New Anglia area, which is Norfolk and Suffolk.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is levy transfer?
Okay, so levy transfer is a scheme that's been going for a few years now, where large organisations who have a payroll of over 3 million have to pay into the government apprenticeship service 0.5% above their payroll. So they have to pay that into the government digital account, and they can use this money to fund their apprenticeships. So either new starts, or if they're going to upskill current staff, they have then got a reserve where they can then fund and pay for their apprentices. But an awful lot of large organisations pay an awful lot of levy, and they don't have capacity to use it all. So they can transfer to another organisation up to 25% of their unspent levy. So they can use it for their supply chain, or they can use it for somebody outside of their supply chain. So levy transfer is a really good scheme to support smaller organisations who don't pay into the levy to access funding for training, but also to make that link with a large employer, which might be beneficial for the apprentice.
Okay.
So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's good. So, I mean, I know that we've talked about levy transfer at length before, and you know, we've kind of been involved in that. So it's really interesting to hear that come back in such a, you know, succinct, you know, nutshell form. So how does it work? So you know, we know what it is now. How does it work?
Right. So how it would work would be that a large organisation could be approached by a small organisation, and the small organisation just asks, are you willing to sponsor? But nationally, that's not happening. So there's a big reserve of unspent funds.
Okay.
So what's happened is the local enterprise partnerships, of which New Anglia is one, there's 16 in the country, have been asked by the government to kind of push this forward, to drive this forward, to get the message out there. So they've recruited people like myself who will support a large organisation to explain about levy transfer, because some large organisations still aren't really aware of what it does. So I would then link a large organisation with a small organisation to source funding for them. And then the small organisation, with my help, would then source a provider. So if they're looking for an engineer, it might be a large national organisation or a large local organisation saying, okay, I will sponsor your apprentice in engineering, because that's an area that we think is important to grow businesses within Norfolk and Suffolk. Yep. And then it's very easy. They're just linked on what's called the Apprenticeship Digital Service.
Okay, so what kind of, when you say smaller businesses, what kind of smaller businesses would kind of benefit or could benefit from this?
Yep, that's a good question. Any small business. So any business that doesn't pay into the levy can access levy transfer. And I ought to put a caveat there, because some organisations pay into the levy and spend all their levy because they're not big payers, and they can also access levy transfer. But the organisations could be in hospitality, retail, engineering, energy, racing. You know, the organisation can be any organisation, doesn't matter.
Okay, and I know that includes kind of office space as well, because I know that, you know, Swarm Apprenticeships, you know, our partner company Swarm has worked alongside on that kind of business side of things with levy transfer, so it works really well within you know, administration, management, those kind of areas as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really upskill staff who have moved into a position. So if they've started off as an administrator, as you're saying, and then they've gone into a team leader role, then that organisation can access levy transfer to support that upskilling of the apprentice, and then they've got a progression route. So the funding will fund from a level 2 apprentice right up to a level 6, so they could get a degree through this transfer.
Yeah, that's really good, and I think that's really important that you've used the word upskill there, because I think sometimes organisations may not be aware that you can use apprenticeship training funding, government training funding for upskilling incumbent workforce rather than just, I think we often think, it appears that it's about bringing somebody new into the business, where actually a lot of the times, or sometimes, it's about improving the skills of somebody that you've already got within your business to help your business grow.
Absolutely. I mean, we've had a really good example with a company in Ipswich who's an IT company, and they've recognised the skills of the administrator who became really interested in coding. And so from there, they were an apprentice through administration, and they've now moved on to the level 4 digital, because they have recognised that that is an area that they want to move into, and also the company is looking for growth. So, they are looking to not just upskill, but for progression within the company. And, really good example of how you can use levy transfer.
Yeah, that is a really good example, because it's about using the resources that you have within the business to actually, who understand your business as well, isn't it? And then you can kind of, so there's always almost a kind of reward sometimes there for your workforce as well, about giving them some training and allowing them to progress within the company. And obviously, if you've got really good talent within your company, if you kind of work them, there's a lot less chance of them not being retained.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we forget that it can be used to, for those purposes. So that's a really good point. I mean, you mentioned the company in Ipswich. I mean, have you any other examples of where that's worked?
Yes, there's a company in Norwich, which they're a young company, young group of young people who are now buying riding boots and equine, I suppose, social wear, I suppose is what it's called. It's not actually for riding, it's when they're socialising.
Okay.
They have that kind of brand look. So they've got a very niche market,
yeah,
and a very young company, very young people doing it. And a particular local retail company were really impressed with their website and what they're doing, and they wanted someone to work within their finance team, because it's an online business. They wanted to grow their own finance team, so they're obviously financial director, and they're using it for an apprentice to do level 3 finance and then progress to level 4 finance. And they could see the real benefits of having an apprentice who understood how that business was going to run almost from conception. It's been going for about 2 years, so that'd be a really good opportunity for the apprentice that started there to grow and develop with that company, and especially the new type of company, which is this online shopping.
Alison, I know that with Swarm Apprenticeships that you've worked quite closely with Swarm on some of this levy transfer quite early on, I think, actually. So how did that work with you, working alongside with Swarm?
Very successful. A very good company. One of the examples that we've worked together is with a boatyard. I mean, in Norfolk, we are a national park now with the Norfolk Broads, and one of our companies is a boat company. And he wanted to expand his own knowledge. This was the owner of the boat company, wanted to expand his own knowledge, but he wanted to do it in a particular way. So he didn't want to go to college. He's an elderly man. He didn't want to do too much online. So Swarm actually really helped, because they can be adaptable and look at the learning needs of all individuals of all ages and help and support him. So working with Swarm, with that particular company, was really good, and it's really encouraged that boat owner to look at further funding and further apprenticeship training for his own team, because his own experience has been very positive.
Yeah, and obviously being involved slightly within that the whole team from Swarm was pulled into that. And I think that's one of the nice things about apprenticeships, because there's certain knowledge areas within teams that can be brought in. So there's some training and tutoring in there. Obviously on the apprenticeship side, there's a bit of consultancy work going on in there. There's some mentoring work going on in there, and it's just about us working together as a team with companies like that, with yourselves, with other training providers sometimes, to make sure that they get the business and the person gets what they want. So I think that's a really good, I think that's a really good case really for the levy transfer. It's collaborative, joined up thinking here, isn't there? So it's everybody working together.
Yeah.
So you've got the apprentice, obviously, and the business that they work with, the levy transfer company, the larger company, the training provider, yourselves at the LEP. And I think that's one of the big things here is all of a sudden we've got this kind of huge support system to make this work, rather than just companies kind of taking on perhaps an apprentice and then they're never left alone. But sometimes it can kind of be there's a piece where, you know, people are working together, but we've got such a much bigger support system here, which is something I know that we've obviously dealt with levy transfer with yourselves as well, and that's one of the things that we've kind of really recognised, and it's phenomenal for us as a training provider as well, is the fact that there's this bigger support system for everybody within that. And I think for us that's been fantastic, and that's where obviously we're a huge supporter of the levy transfer system, but I think that's where it makes it so special, actually, that it's everybody come together to help smaller businesses in the area, not just have somebody upskilled or take somebody on new, but actually be supported all the way through that. And I think that's where I don't know if, I think that's where you may have seen where there's some huge advantages to this.
I think so, because I think a lot of people are a bit frightened of it. They're thinking it's a bit confusing. They're thinking it's going to be a lot of paperwork, a lot of bureaucracy, but it really isn't. The government has smartened up the digital apprenticeship service, and it's really quite straightforward. But it just needs someone who is using it all the time just to say, no, this is fairly straightforward. This is what you need to do, and created a flow chart, which is quite easy to follow. So all the transfers that we've done with the smaller organisations, they haven't had an issue with registering, with accessing, with connecting up with a large organisation and connecting up with a training provider. So I'm there to support that process so that there isn't a blockage and people aren't afraid. I mean, it's like anything new, people are a bit wary of. But
and I think with that, with all training providers, I think the support from the training providers, because they already see training providers as well, that there's just this kind of this training purpose, which is obviously incredibly important, but it's the back office systems and how good training providers in general are at supporting, especially small business, maybe their first time, along with yourselves, to make sure that it runs as smoothly as possible with that digital system. And there is great support all the way through, and we've seen it work, you've seen it work, and it does remove that fear a little bit, I think, once people can see how it works. So that's a really good point. But so who can access it? Who can access this levy transfer?
So anyone, well, the caveat is you can't be self-employed. So anyone who isn't self-employed, so any companies can access it. So if they're interested in taking on an apprentice, they can obviously contact the training provider. They could contact us who are working with the large employers, or they can go directly to us and we can then help them source it. So the apprentice themselves can't really access it. It is the employer. So the employer, I work with a lot of the employer forums and construction areas and engineering and the retail forums. So anyone could access it and apply. And any large organisation can kind of block out all those numerous calls that they get and just go through one central point. So, you know, a large organisation could come to us and say, look, do you mind just managing this for us, and take away that bureaucracy that they might feel that they have.
Yeah, and that's another good point, actually, isn't it? That's another route in for the levy transfer, isn't it? Large organisations actually say, well, actually, we've got some capacity with our levy pot. How can we support smaller businesses in our area? Yeah, and obviously they can then contact you, and you will guide them through and help them with that.
Yeah, and one of the things that has really come out, which I wasn't expecting, was a lot of the large organisations have a real interest in the apprentice that they're sponsoring. Yeah, looking at it as a sponsor, and a lot of the large organisations are also offering, therefore, a work visit to their organisation just to see how different organisations work. Some are doing additional training, which is really good, and some are offering free mentoring for leadership. Wow, that's good. Yeah, so for the large organisations, for their corporate social responsibility, they're taking it quite seriously.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because and that's also about the learning that an apprentice or somebody who's being upskilled, if they go into those organisations, can bring back to the small business that they've got, lead into innovation and obviously different thinking sometimes that can come back to, which they would never see normally. So that's actually really valuable, and that's a really good point. And that's once again about that collaborative support, isn't it?
Yeah.
And driving the area forward by everybody kind of, and I think perhaps we may be in a time where, you know, that's never been more important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bit of joined up thinking, it's good. Yeah. So, sorry.
The smaller employer has then made a link, which hopefully might source funding for future apprentices. So they've then made the link.
So that's a long-term relationship.
Long-term relationship, hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, wow, that's good. That's good. So I'm wanting to upskill one of my members of my workforce or bring in a new apprentice. How do I go about? What's the route in here for me?
For you, you and I'd work together. So you'd contact me, and we would look and see what type of apprentice it was. We would have a look and see what the training was going to be, see how viable it is. I would then approach our, I'd like to say, virtual pot of funders, and I would put forward your case. So you'd fill out an application form. I send it off to virtual funders. They then have a look and they say, yep, actually, we would like to sponsor this person. So once that connection has made, I will then email both of you so that you're then connected, and you would then make sure that you're on the Apprenticeship Digital Service account. So I'd help you get onto that if you're not already on it. And then the large employer just finds you on that service through your employer ID, and then you are then connected. And then once that's happened, you and I would then source a training provider for whatever apprenticeship it was. You would make that connection, have a chat with them about how they deliver, is it suitable for what you want, and you would then connect with them. And then the way it works is that each month from the start of that apprenticeship, money will then flow briefly into your account as the employer, and then quickly taken out and taken to the provider. So the money is paid not as a lump sum, but on a month-by-month basis for the duration of the apprenticeship. If that apprentice should finish early, that's fine, the money will still flow. And if the apprentice decides it's not for them, the money will then stop and you don't owe any money back.
Okay, so that's fairly. So that there's kind of it impacts on the risk. There's very low risk for somebody who wants to come in. Yeah,
no risk.
Yeah, I mean, so what would be going just retracking on that? If somebody wanted to explore more about levy transfer as perhaps as a small business or a medium-sized business who were looking to take somebody on, what would be their very first thing they would do?
To access levy transfer?
Yep.
So they would contact me at New Anglia Lep.
Yep.
And I would have a chat with them and just to talk them through the whole process. Okay,
and that's their starting point. So nice and easy route. Just give you a call and you'll start the process and guiding all the way through.
Yeah. So
excellent.
I can help them understand what recruitment is about, link them with training providers in the local area, and obviously source funding for them.
Okay. So where do you see this going in the future? Do you see this expanding out? Is this now going nationwide, or where are we going with levy transfer?
So levy transfer is nationwide. It's underused. We know that the government is saying that there's 53 million pounds unspent going back into the treasuries. We want to make sure it doesn't go back in the treasury, and we want to use it for skills. So it is a national programme. And most either combined authorities or local enterprise partnerships have got a coordinator like myself who is driving this forward. What we're seeing in the future is possibly it could be managed through a kind of brokerage system, so that the large organisations can just contact one organisation and then they will then manage it for them. Some large organisations are managing it quite well themselves through their own supply chain. So I think there will be a mixed model moving forward.
Okay, that all sounds like the future to me. Alison, I'd really like to thank you for having this chat today. Really informative. I'll put all the details up at the end of how you can be contacted. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.